Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Good, the mic's working. Thank you so much for coming to our Spring Forum, May 2018. This is the third forum that we've held now in relation to Transform Leatherhead. I'm very happy to introduce to you Simon Edge, who is our Cabinet Member for Prosperity, who's going to kick off this evening's presentation. Thank you.
Right, is my microphone on? It is. Can you all hear me? Yes. Good. No? Who said no? I'm told I'm very quietly spoken, so the microphones have to be turned up so that I can be heard. Well, as Emma said, yes, this is the third of our presentations that we've given to the public. It's also going to be live streamed on Facebook. It's going to be filmed, so I believe I'm on at the moment. There are cameras at the back, so they will only show the backs of all of your heads, just to give people an impression of the audience. So if you are sitting with somebody you shouldn't be, now's probably the time to just quickly swap over. I'm not looking at you, Joe. If you could turn your phones to silent, please, so that we don't get any interruptions. And I think that's about it, really. Yeah, this is the general layout of the presentation. We've got a recap of how we got to Transform Leatherhead. I'll go through an update on each of the major projects. We'll talk about next steps, and then we'll go into a question and answer session where I will cross the floor to sit with my colleagues there, and we will take questions from you. So let's get moving. This is my second of the three that we've done so far. Some of you will have listened to all three and be very knowledgeable about Transform. Others, this will be your first time. So I thought it'd be useful to just start at the beginning, which was around 2014, where the council decided that it would put its efforts into transforming Leatherhead. It's a 25-year plus horizon that we're trying to work to, which is unusual sometimes in local government, people taking the longer-term view. And the idea is to make the town centre a much more attractive place for people to live, work, play, and to also maximise the economic potential of the town. And that's certainly important to all our retailers and other businesses that are in the town. It's about jobs, it's about home, it's about leisure and retail, transport, accessibility, and a thing that we call the public realm, which is just the general look, feel, and how the place comes across to people. Excuse the uncouth bottle of water. I think it's somebody's way of stopping me spilling anything over the computer. Following 2014, or in between 2014 and 2016, we went out to a fairly extensive consultation process. There were all sorts of events, and we had literally thousands of people respond to us. Over 2,000 people filled in questionnaires and sent papers in to us, and we had something like 5,800 people come to the general presentations and exhibitions that we did, which really was incredibly responsive of the people of Leatherhead. Clearly there was a passion for change, and people were very supportive of the general ideas and concepts that the council was putting forward. But it is all about transformation. This isn't about tinkering with Leatherhead, and what we're doing, all of these comments are just a random sample of the sorts of things that we got back from people. People want to see change. They don't want to see us doing what perhaps councils have done in the past, just tinkering around the edges with bits and pieces here and there. They really want to see the place change. So after the 2 years, that brought us into a position where we could create a master plan and a vision to encapsulate what it is we're trying to do on the public's behalf to improve Leatherhead. It's, as the words there say, it's a big project, it's long-term. But because big and long-term projects are usually very complex, And because there can be pauses, or it may appear that there are pauses between various phases and stages in these projects, people do start to ask us, well, how are you going to look at the balance between projects and the balance within projects of what you're prepared to do and how you're prepared to do it? So we came up with this Venn diagram to show how we think about balance. First off, anything that we do has to produce a positive change, and we're defining that as something that actually speaks to and delivers on an element within the Transform master plan. Secondly, there has to be community benefit. And by that, we're talking about the wider benefits to the wider community in the environs and things that link in with the council's strategic priorities. And thirdly, it has to make economic sense. Now, this is a balancing act, and economic sense is something that we may need to compromise on as we go through the programme. So I better not say that too loudly, as we have our finance director in the audience. But what I'm talking about here is we have to make a return on the investment that we're making, because it's public money that we're using in one form or another. We can't just sacrifice the public pound. So if we can hit the centre spot, we will be doing very well with individual projects. My suspicion is that we'll probably be somewhere in that sort of area, trading off one against the other as we go along. But that's generally how we do it. So I also wanted to say something about communication, because we do appreciate, obviously, that people are both excited and naturally concerned about the extent of change that might come about as a result of transforming Leatherhead. And change is always unsettling. But as it's positive change, we're hoping that by the time we finish, people will be, really very comfortable and pleased with all the work that's been done. Now, we communicate in a number of ways, which, whoops, wrong one. There we go. Number of ways that we communicate. And I do want to emphasise here that it would be really good if you could join us on social media and sign up to the monthly updates that we're going to be putting on the website. I've been a little bit concerned recently that people are looking at artists' impressions that were produced in the original master plan and trying to project their anxieties through social and other media out onto the rest of the population of Leatherhead, and stirring up all sorts of anxieties that if people read the material that we put up and talked to us about them, there would be no need for that sort of anxiety to happen. Just picking off a couple of these as well. The Business Reference Group is an idea that came out of the Council's recently adopted economic prosperity strategy as a way of reaching out to businesses across the whole of Mull Valley and involving them more in the Council, in developing the Council's thinking about what it wants to do and how it wants to do it. And we thought that with Transform Leatherhead, it would be an ideal opportunity to pilot that. So we're going to try and get that off the ground. This is in addition to, it's not instead of, any of the other forums and chamber and other activities that we might have at the moment and will continue with. There is one caveat to all of this, and that is that over time things change, things happen. We were, one of the social media commentators referred to us as being disingenuous after the last update when... was that you, sir? We were referred to as disingenuous because something happened following one of the updates that we gave that they didn't think was right or shouldn't have, or should have been told, announced at the last update. The truth is that we are never disingenuous with the information that we put out. I'm certainly not going to stand here and try and string you lot a pack of lies. There's absolutely no mileage in it for me. All I want to do, and the team want to do, is improve Leatherhead and transform it, as we've been told. But stuff happens. We live in the real world. Structural engineers' reports come in and tell us that we can't do what we wanted to do with a particular building without it falling over. Well, that's a hint we ought to take, and that's what happens. So What we're about to go through today is the best knowledge and information that we have at the present time. I can't guarantee you that some of the projects and plans won't be tweaked or change as the years go by, because this is something that's going to happen over a number of years. So, also thought it'd be useful to look at the way in which Transform has been put together. There are three key project areas which we'll go on to look at in terms of the urban, the retail and the riverside quarters. But there are other areas as well in terms of businesses and in terms of sport and leisure that are all knitted together. So when we're looking at projects, when we're looking at what we're doing and how we do it, we think about the synergies that can be created within these three areas. And we look at how the plans and the policies and the project rather, all work together. So it's a coordinated activity. It's not something where we're just doing odd projects here and there and stringing them all together. These are the three quarters that we're going to be talking about tonight. Each of them has different phases. Each of them has different projects within them. But they're all responding to the consultations and the information that we were given during that, as I said, the extensive consultation between 2014 and 2016. Now, before we get onto that, I don't necessarily expect everybody to be able to read this, but I did want to show it to you. At the end of the last update, I promised to continue to put out as much information as I could. And the programme overview and other key documents seem to be a good place to start. You can see this, it's on the Transform website. Go into the downloads, look for the programme overview, and you can look at this to your heart's content. I want to emphasise that we've got a whole block of activity up here, which is all about governance and engagement. Scattered throughout the document, there are other areas where we have individual consultations and comments on particular projects. You've got the main projects down here, and you've got how they break down into sub-projects, each one of which has various stages, and each one follows across on the timetable. We've only gone up to 2021 on this example because there's only so much you can get on a page. But I was very pleased. We popped this up, I think it was late January, early February this year. And I was very pleased that the Leatherhead Advertiser picked it up and some of the other documents that we put up there and used it for the article that they had on page 7 of their 17th of May edition, which I thought was a very factual representation of what we're trying to do. Now, if that looks complicated, you've also got to remember that each of these projects is usually dependent on at least one other project. So there's a sequence and an ordering of these things, and they all happen in their own natural flow. Looking at the Riverside Park, we can't do that until we've scoped what it is we're looking to do, and we can't do that until our colleagues at the Environment Agency have finished their work on planning flood alleviation. And of course, we also have to look in terms of the financials of this, and the idea is that a return that we get on transforming Clare and James House will be used to pay for the Riverside Park. Similarly, in relation to the Red House Gardens and Bull Hill projects, we've got to see how the Swan Centre long-term study turns out in terms of what we want to do with the Swan Centre. We've got to bear in mind, of course, planning regulations and the new local plan that's being created at the moment. And probably as important as any of them is transport modelling. We need to understand how the flows of traffic are going to work before we even think of what we're going to do to that area of land over and above what we've said we're committed to, which is a mixed-use development. So we can now start talking about the individual quarters and where we are with the projects within them. Starting with the Riverside, the three projects, Clare and James House, the Riverside Park, and flood alleviation. So just in case anybody needed it, here's a picture of what Clare House and James House currently look like. And the consultation responses we had were that they are not shining examples of 1970s architecture. And we can and we fully intend to do better than this. But more importantly than that, this area of land provides us with an opportunity to create a new hub, a node of activity that will draw people into the town and generally improve what is currently a very underused part of the town. We said that we would appoint, at the last update, we said that we would appoint a team to manage this particular project and take us through to a stage of getting outline planning application. This is the team, and you can see there are a number of experts that we're involved with: architects, technical consultants, planning consultants, and commercial real estate advisors, which sounds very American, but never mind. But just because we employ experts to give us advice and help make sure that we do the best that we can, the council still retains the direction for the redevelopment. And the design team are going to be preparing an outline planning permission based on what we've told them we need, which is based on what we were told people want from the consultation. So we're looking at a significant high quality and high design building, A3 restaurant and cafe facilities on the ground floor, residential units, obviously the thing has to be paid for, and concepts for what the Riverside Park, which will be a separate project, will look like. And all of those were as announced, I think, in last November. The next steps will involve an awful lot of planning process. And I do want to emphasise here that just because we're the council, we do not get any sort of fast pass ticket to any of the activities that we have to go through in order to get any form of planning consent. And again, we have the head of planning sitting with us, and I can see he's looking approvingly at me making those comments. What we know is that we've got our first pre-planning application meeting on the 11th of June, and then we have a public exhibition week starting on the 8th of July, which coincides with Duck Race Day. After that, we start getting anticipated and targeted dates. That's what we want to achieve. That's the timetable that we've set ourselves. We may be able to advance it. We may have to retard it. But everything we do will be subject to consultation and full scrutiny through the planning process. The next element is the Riverside Park, and we've got the master plan vision here for something that will attract people into the town and both residents and visitors. The idea is that people will come in, they'll shop, they'll walk around, they'll enjoy the views, they'll buy a coffee, they'll have lunch. The whole experience changes from people running into Leatherhead, getting whatever they want, and then disappearing off again. But please don't read too much into the artist's impression. This is designed to show the bridge and its environs improved and better used. It's not, where are we? Sorry, wrong one. It's not supposed to try and convey that the things will look exactly like this. We do get quite a bit of excitement where people say, can you tell us what it's going to look like? So we produce an artist's impression designed to give just that, an impression of what things might look like when they're refreshed and updated. But then people tend to latch onto them and say, oh, so it's going to look like that then. Well, hopefully it'll look something like that, improved, brighter, cleaner, more serviceable, more usable. But it may not look exactly like that. And I've said before, show me another town in anywhere in the UK where it's got this wonderful riverside frontage and does so little with it. We can and we do want to get better down at the riverside. The concept was very well supported during the consultation, and of course anything that we do, we are going to again fully consult, but we're also want to reach out to the local wildlife and conservation groups so that we make sure that we don't just avoid upsetting the wildlife in the work we do, but we actually improve the lot of wildlife as we're developing the area. And as I said, this is, at the end of the Clare and James House project, we will have initial concepts. We won't have the finished design. Now, the third project that we have is to do with, or projects that we're involved with, is flood alleviation. And there are two slides here. One talks about Leatherhead, and the other is talking about the wider environs out to Fetcham. And I believe we have Nick Philpott and Andrew Irvine in the audience. We do, good. So I'm going to invite them to come up here for a couple of minutes, talk to the next two slides, and just introduce themselves. Let me know when you want the next slide on. I'll press the button.
Evening, everybody. Yeah, thanks very much. It's a good opportunity, really, just to sort of highlight the collaborative work we've been doing through the flood alleviation scheme, and to give you a bit of an update on where things have progressed to. But before we sort of get on to that side of things, it was good to give a bit of a background as to sort of how we've got to where we are at the moment. So, as most of you are well aware, December 2013, the flood event that occurred Christmas Eve was one of the biggest that's hit the River Mole since 1968. Approximately 85 properties were flooded, mainly in the Fetcham area, but also through Thorncroft and other parts of Leatherhead itself. Approximately 1 in 75 year return period, so a probability event of about 1.5. But that doesn't mean to say a 1 in 75 year event is only going to happen once every 75 years. So there is a probability that flooding will occur more regularly than that, climate change. So there's a lot of issues there. So what we did, we commissioned 2 investigations. Initially, an update on the modelling, which is integral to providing that level of understanding as to what the river does. So there's 2 modelling commissions were done, one for the upper mole, which starts above Crawley and runs down through Crawley and Hawley, and the second one, which was more integral to here, is the middle mole, which runs from Hawley through to Esher, which covers the Dorking and Leatherhead sections. So that was undertaken. It's a very complicated model, has only really been finished in 2017, but dovetailing in with that was the mole catchment study. So we were looking at the whole middle mole as a cell, as to what we could do within that reach. Was there a single opportunity to reduce flooding to the wider community that could be done at a catchment scale? That report in 2016 concluded that actually the hydrology and the risk through the middle mole in particular would be better addressed by local solutions. So we've had to develop a flood alleviation scheme specifically for Fetcham and Leatherhead rather than a wider mole catchment investigation. But in the same time, we're also developing another one for Dorking and other areas that were impacted. So in 2017, the flood alleviation scheme option appraisal began to look at what opportunities within the local environs of Leatherhead and Fetcham could be done, and that tested out a number of scenarios, used the model to develop those in more understanding, but equally recognised that the flooding through Fetcham in particular is very complicated. It's not just the River Mole as a river system. There's an integrated surface water network that drains down through Fetcham and wants to drain into the River Mole as well. So you've got a sort of 2-pronged attack of sources of floodwater. You've got the River Mole draining sort of from upstream, but you've also got surface water, and the two meet at Fetcham. So it is quite a complicated system to try and resolve. At the same time, what we have been doing, as well as understanding the mechanism of flooding, and we'll go on to sort of where we are with the next steps, is to sort of provide a temporary defence plan. So we've been looking particularly at Leatherhead and Fetcham as to what we could do as a short-term measure to protect certain parts of the town. Particularly we were looking at Thorncroft and Fetcham, but unfortunately neither of those would offer up a temporary defence that would be achievable. The volume of floodwater and the speed of floodwaters that flow through there weren't in a position to sort of develop any kind of temporary defence plan. But For the area around Minchin Close and Bridge Street, there is the potential, and what we've done now is we'll go into, on the second slide, talk about that as a plan that we now have that is operational to protect that cell. Andy will go through a little bit more on the next steps.
Okay, thanks very much, Nick. So yeah, as Nick said, I think where we've got to now is a really, really good understanding of what the mechanisms for flooding are for Leatherhead and for Fetcham in particular. So I think what we've understood is that there are some really tangible steps that we can take to reduce flooding to Leatherhead town centre and to the communities there, but Fetcham is a different kettle of fish. And we're going to have to be working closely with Surrey County Council, Sutton and East Surrey Water and Thames Water to look at the complex drainage measures that we need to put in there to address that risk at the same time. So what we don't want to do is come in and solve the problem from the river and then leave Fetcham kind of high and dry is not the right word, but without without a solution for that as well. So, I mean, our funding is very much tied into the number of properties that we can protect, and we're very keen to make sure that we maximise the number that benefit from it. So what we do in terms of further engagement, we'll be continuing to talk with, we're very grateful to have a very active flood action group for Fetcham in particular. We've been talking to them throughout. They've been giving us ideas about some of the solutions that work locally for them. We've been able to implement some immediate kind of maintenance measures that start to help that. We've been helping the council also engage with Network Rail and the water companies as well to try and get them on board and solve some of those local issues that you see more regularly. So the river floods quite infrequently, but those surface water issues are something that happens quite frequently and are probably playing on the minds of residents more than the river itself. So where do we go next? I think we've mentioned earlier there's going to be a day later in the year. There's going to be your Duck Race Day, but in September there's also a River Awareness Day, and we're hoping to come along and showcase our temporary defences, which is something we're looking to put in place in the meantime while we're waiting to put the bigger scheme in place. So Simon, if you could flick over. So there's some pictures up here of what that looks like. So this is really, as I say, a very temporary measure, but actually something that can provide some substantial benefit in the right areas. It's a short-term option. We can come in very quickly and deploy these defences. They're used up and down the country. We can deploy them in front of households. We can put them across bits of critical infrastructure, such as kind of substations and things like that. So we've got a plan that's ready to run with. In fact, we had this ready to deploy from Christmas this year. So we'll be talking to residents about how we deploy this. And we're going to do a test run in the autumn as well. So we'd encourage you to come down and have a look at that as we get out on the ground and do it. So I think that's all we wanted to say, but we'll be here at the end for questions. So thank you very much for letting us give you an update.
Thank you. Well, thank you very much, chaps. And as they said, they will be here for questions and answers at the end. So if there are any particular questions on flood alleviation, those are the guys who will be answering. So that takes us on to the retail and leisure quarter. 3 phases here: Church Street, the Swan Centre, and Public Realm. So we're going to start with Church Street. And doesn't it look good? It really does. It's completely improved the environment for the public and for businesses who are working in the area. Now, I want to say a few thanks here, particularly to the council's partners, Surrey County Council, the Coast Capital Local Enterprise Partnership, to our retailers who had to cope with the disruption, but also to our contractors who really made the effort to get out there, talk to the businesses and explain what was going on and to help them work around the inconvenience that was caused. We also have 2 special mentions. One is to Rod Shaw, who masterminded it from the council's perspective. He put in a huge amount of work and I think has created something that we can all be very proud of. The second special thank you is to the Leatherhead Residents Association. Caroline's in the audience, and also to Lucy Quinnell at the Fire and Iron Gallery. I don't know, is Lucy here with us? She is. Hello, Lucy. Caroline came to me with the idea that apparently wasn't had been floated before about putting some stars outside the front of the theatre. This helps us to celebrate the theatre's heritage. It also provides us with a really nice little extra something as people are walking through the town to see the stars, celebrating actors who've had particular associations with the theatre. It was a great idea. I'm so grateful to you guys for help us make it happen. And, long may those stars remain there. Church Street has already been used for various events, and this, I think, demonstrates that it's not just a nice-looking area, but it's also a utility area. It's heavily used by traffic and pedestrians, but it's also somewhere that's got the flexibility that it can be used for events such as these. On the top here we have Halloween with the Thriller dance troupe from the Dandelion Theatre performing Thriller. And on the bottom slides, we have some pictures of the Christmas celebrations. We've got the pantomime here, the players that were performing on this very stage, and also the arrival of the Three Kings for the Christmas celebration. So it's clearly an area that we can use, and that is a multi-purpose space. On to the Swan Centre. The master plan ambition is to really use the Swan Centre as an area that we can anchor the whole town and rejuvenate the high street with. And I said at the last update that was going to involve us in two phases. There's some short-term work and improvements that we can do to make the Swan Centre a more attractive and welcoming place in the interim, and then there's the longer-term stuff, which I'll go on to talk about later. We've appointed a project manager and contractors to do the work that we said we would do, which includes replacing the lifts. That's going to start sometime in the autumn, but we will phase it so that we don't trample all over the Christmas period when people are trying to get in and out of the shops. We wouldn't want to do that to the retailers. We've also got a planning application that I believe has gone through for car park improvements. You remember I said that we would look to remove some of the curbs to make it easier for people to get in and out without dinging their car every time they try and get through the car park. So that's all going to be going through as well. One of those things happen moments was in relation to the toilets, which we were intending to move, but a structural engineer's report said that that was not a feasible thing to do, so they're going to stay where they are, but they're going to be refurbished. We also had a session of consultation where we floated out a number of options for rebadging the Swan Centre. This is the winning design, and so thank you to everybody who contributed and gave their views on that. And we'll be using this new image and logo as part of refurbishing the centre. We'll introduce this into the new signage and the new look of the place. So those are the shorter term improvements. In the longer term, as I said, the master plan vision is all about revitalising the high street, using the Swan Centre as a way of doing that. Here again, we have the artist's impression from the master plan, and again, it is an impression. But what I'd like you to take away from this is that in revitalising the high street, it's still going to have a high streety look. We're not going for an image that is just acres and acres of plate glass and ruining the character of the town. Now, to do something as big as a study to revitalise something like the Swan Centre, it was something that we thought we really needed to get some expertise in. So we went out to engage some experts who had experience, who had expertise, a proven track record in doing this sort of work in other towns. And I'm very pleased to say that we appointed Cushman and Wakefield with Conisbee, not the butchers, Conisbee, the consulting structural engineers. And I believe we have, where are we? John Percy in the audience. We do, that's good. And John is just going to come up from Cushman's. He's just going to come up and again introduce himself and say a few words about what's going to be happening.
Good evening. It's a delight to be here. My name is John Percy, and I head up the development team at Cushman & Wakefield. In particular, I have a specialism of towns and city centres and retail places. Cushman & Wakefield, for those who don't know it, are a global firm of property advisors. I steer away from real estate, as you see, it is a bit of an Americanism. We are known for our strength in retail property, and in the UK we have around 120 retail professionals working on all parts of the kind of retail property world. And we deal with sort of hundreds of shopping centres, shopping parks and high streets across the UK, from the iconic to something like the Battersea Power Station to much more local and high street side, and indeed some local centres such as Kingston and Guildford. The other members of our team are those who we've worked with on other projects in the past and are also award-winning experts in repositioning and repurposing shopping centres and retail places. It was probably a couple of months ago when the actual tender package arrived in terms of the Leatherhead seeking an advisor for this. And it was just the sort of thing that we absolutely love. And it was such that your ambitions are fantastic, and looking really for the shopping centre to be that catalyst for the regeneration of the high street, and really establishing much more of a sense of place around the town centre and the town itself. And that aspiration certainly resonated with us. I think there's a great quote that sort of sits alongside this stuff. It says, if you dislike change, you're going to dislike irrelevance even more. And I think that's never more so than for our towns and urban places as it stands, as we see really quite seismic shifts in the way that we shop and engage with our retailers and leisure operators. And this isn't just a Surrey matter or a UK matter, it's a global issue, and some of those global things I think can be brought to the town to do something here. But we're really just on the very start of the journey. We've only had our sort of initial meetings on this over the course of this week, but you know, the scale of passion from the town is evident by the amount of people who are here this evening and throughout this whole process. So we're absolutely relishing the opportunity of working with you over the next few months in trying to identify some solutions for the centre. Thank you.
Thank you, John. So that takes us on to some news. We did put announcements out about this, but just to make sure everybody's on the same page. The council has bought recently 21 and 23 the High Street, and together with the Carphone Warehouse space, which Carphone Warehouse decided not to renew their lease, so they've moved on when the lease expired. But owning these two properties really gives us a strategic hold on the High Street, and the ability to work these two buildings together with the Carphone Warehouse site into the redevelopment of the Swan Centre and the way in which it impacts the High Street is really a great opportunity for us to see what Cushman's can do with it. In the meantime, we're going to be letting the properties. One of them is actually already let to the Barbers. But if you are interested in leasing one of these two properties, we do have details available, and we'll be happy to sign you up. And that then takes us on to public realm. And here we have the dependency diagram again, because obviously the public realm is going to follow. Is this the right one? Yeah. Yes. There we are. Transport modelling is going to affect the public realm strategy. So whatever we do will be affected by how the Swan Centre is redeveloped and how the transport options study, which I'll come on to talk about, actually impacts on the High Street. So we'll decide what it looks like and how it should fit together, again, with consultation later on. So that takes us on to the urban quarter. Again, we've got 3 phases here: the transport study, sustainable transport, and what goes on Bull Hill and the Red House Garden sites. The ambition from the master plan and the vision for this was that we were looking for a step change and in the gateway entrance from the station side of the town into the town, and for this space to have a big impact on the way Leatherhead looks and feels. The transport study, in April of this year, we appointed WSP. Those letters do stand for something, but they just like to be called WSP. They're going to work with the Transform Leatherhead team, with our planning policy people, and with Surrey County Council to look at transport in the area. This purpley dotted line going round the outside is clearly much wider than the Transform area, and that's so that we can make sure that when we're affecting the traffic flow here, we don't interfere or make the traffic flow in the wider surrounds any more complicated than it has to be. Now, I'm told WSP are going to be using a micro-simulation model. Don't ask me what that is, but what it will do is model the impact of the various forecasts of growth in traffic relating to the different Transform Leatherhead scenarios that can be played out. So they get plugged into the model, lots of little dots run around the screen, and it produces an answer as to where new choke points are going to be created, where old choke points are going to be freed up. And obviously the idea is to try and balance that all out so that we end up with the traffic flowing as smoothly and reasonably as possible. And it'll certainly be the key to working out what we do with the gyratory system and decisions on the public realm and other projects of that nature. Now, moving on to sustainable transport. Sadly, the idea of having the Randalls Road cycle path has had to be closed as a project. This was due to the proposals not meeting the modelling requirements by Surrey County Council in order to get funding from the Coastal Capital Local Economic Partnership. There were also issues raised by some private landlords about access by the public over their land. And there were some design issues as well, particularly on Waterways Road, where there simply wasn't enough room, enough space to be able to create what we were looking for. So another example of things happen. However, there is a potential silver lining to this particular cloud, which is improving the bus service on Randalls Road. We've had quite a lot of comment from that recently, and there is potential, and I stress the word potential, to use the funds earmarked for the cycle path project that we have available to help improve the bus service. We're going to investigate and explore that, and we will obviously report back in one of our monthly updates, and then again at the next update for the public forum, as and when we have any further information on that. So that takes us on to Bull Hill and Red House Gardens. Now, again, I do want to emphasise that this is an artist's impression. It's an artist's impression of what a mixed-use development that contains residential, retail, open parkland, and play areas might look like. Again, this particular artist's impression, which again dates back to 2016 and as part of the master plan, did get a front page spread recently in the local paper. Now, what I can probably reasonably confidently predict is that whatever happens on Bull Hill, it's not going to look like that. The walls of the buildings may not be that yellow, the sky may not be that blue, and I can guarantee that those people will not be stood in those positions when you walk through. But as I said, what we're supposed to be showing here is what a mixed-use, modern, hopefully attractive and multi-purpose space can look like. Bearing in mind that we are looking, based on the public consultation that we had and the feedback we received, for a step change gateway and something that is going to prompt transformation. But here we go back to the dependency diagram again. There's nothing that's going to happen here until we've sorted out the Swan Centre. We've taken into full account the planning requirements, and we've done the transport modelling. As though all of those will have a very strong influence on what is even proposed, and that's before we go into consultation, that's before we go into the planning arrangements, and before the first sod is cut. Anything that we do up until that, if anybody tells you they know what it's going to look like, or that certain things are going to happen, or certain things aren't going to happen, it really is simply speculation based on the artist's interpretation and the general objectives that we've got. Now, a few plugs for some events that are coming up. First one is the duck race on the 8th of July. We've got the Transform team will be attending that event so that we can kick off our public exhibition week for Transform. We will continue to have consultations throughout the process, and we will continue to consult on all the other projects that we're doing. The Swan Centre will be continue to have its monthly markets. And there will also be various other events going on, Christmas, Halloween, as we've had before. But also next week, because it's half term, the centre is putting on various family activities, and there will be craft sessions and opportunities there for people to get involved with. And the Dandelion Theatre drama group will be doing various performances and also having drama workshops as well. So if anybody's interested in that, they can pop along and enjoy it. The last one we've got down here is the Kingston Road Recreation Ground, which is going to be refurbished during the summer, and there's also going to be a new skate park, which was designed in consultation with the people who want to use it. And I'm told it's going to be much more challenging than the one that's there at the moment. So we better warn the accident emergency unit that there'll be a few more arms and legs coming in, I suppose. So, drawing to a close, you'll be relieved to hear. These are the key milestones, a very short summary of what we want to do during 2018-2019. We want to get the Clare House and James House outline planning application sorted out, get on with the short-term refurbishment of the Swan Centre, and get the viability study for the longer-term use of the Swan Centre sorted out. Our colleagues with the Environment Agency will be doing their flood alleviation engagement. We'll have the transport study up and running, if not completed, and we will hopefully have the Business Reference Group pilot running as well. I wanted to thank various people who, all of these bodies have worked with us, some for a very long time, some particularly over the last 6 months. We are engaging with an awful lot of people in an awful lot of ways to try and make sure that we continue to get your input and continue to consider that and try and reflect it in the work that we do. I'd also, although they very modestly not put themselves up here, I'd like to thank the Transform team of officers at Mole Valley Council. They put in a huge amount of work. They are a small team, and I think the results that they're producing are absolutely excellent. So if you're not on the slide personally, there's the everybody else who knows me bit where you get a dedication on the radio. If you have been left off, no offence intended, but thank you for your contributions, and please keep them coming. Now we've got a very special slide here, which is the congratulations slide. Muddy Stilettos is a great award system. It's driven by the public, and I think all of the people up here have done fantastically to be nominated to be successful. I think we've got a couple of the relevant businesses in the audience, but I won't embarrass you by asking you to stand up. But I do think that we should give all of those businesses a round of applause. Thank you, and that takes us on to the question and answer session. This is the bit we look forward to the most in the evening. So just a couple of notes about how we're going to run this. We've got Alison Walgar on the far right. She's our principal project surveyor. We have Emma Day, who will shortly be sitting in the middle. She is our executive head of service and the officer responsible for running the officer team that does all the work. And I will be wandering over there to sit on the end to help answer some of the questions. There will be roving mics. That's why we taped off some of the aisles to give the people with the roving mics the opportunity to get to you. Could I ask, if you do want to ask a question, please just put your hand up and we will try and get to you. And when you do get your opportunity to ask a question, can you ask one question, please? Last time we had lots and lots of people who weren't able to ask their questions because there was some people were asking more than one. So if you can bear with us on that, there's a gentleman in the middle there already with his hand up, dead keen to be the first one to ask a question. And so we will now move on to that stage.
I'll just wait for Simon to walk across and join us. So, as Simon said, the floor's open to you all to ask any questions you may have. We've allowed approximately 45 minutes to deal with any questions. If we don't get to all of you, we're sorry, but we will do our best to answer any questions in writing after the event, and we'll post those on our Transform Leatherhead website for you to access. And as Simon said in the presentation, we have a dedicated Transform Leatherhead email address, so please do keep sending in your questions. We'll do our very best to answer them on the basis of the information that we have at that time. Now, we have two colleagues with us from the Environment Agency who've got a pretty lengthy journey home this evening. So if at all possible, I'd like to start with any questions anyone may have in relation to flood alleviation measures, if there are any. Otherwise, I can then let them go home and get their trains. So is there anybody in the audience tonight who would like to ask a question around flood alleviation?
Sorry, no, can I ask a question? Sorry.
Would you mind if we just did flooding first, and then I'll... Sorry, do you have a flood question, or...? No. Okay, I understand there's a lady over there in a red top.
I live, the gentleman down here. I live on River Lane in Leatherhead, and we were affected by the flooding in December 13. Obviously, my concern would be that if you're putting the alleviation scheme in the town, we're on the way out. Is it going to push more our way? Obviously, you're looking at Fetcham.
Yeah.
We're this side of Fetcham. We were flooded from the crematorium. It came in through the crematorium down. Luckily, I kept it out of the house. But Christmas Eve, we had sandbags and all the rest, and we had absolutely no help from anyone whatsoever, and haven't had since. So I just want you to know that obviously anything you push down the river is going to come twice as fast to us.
Okay. Can I ask one of my colleagues from the EA to pick up the question? We do understand how emotive flooding is, but the specific question I'll ask Andy Irvin to answer. Oh, sorry, Nick.
Actually, I'll
sorry,
take
Nick.
this one. Yeah, I think we recognise that the areas that were impacted are quite wide-ranging, from Thorncroft all the way down through the town, through Fetcham and out on towards the crematorium and beyond. So this adds to the complexity of trying to develop a scheme or a combination of measures that provide adequate protection, because the idea is as the studies have so far shown, there isn't a single solution that can provide that level of assurance and certainty across the wider community. So the likelihood is we're going to have to do a series of interventions that are going to be quite wide-ranging across the broader Leatherhead and Fetcham area. We've got quite a comprehensive database of where the properties that were impacted. And part of the complexity is that if we are storing more floodwater in a certain cell, is that it doesn't increase the risk elsewhere. So it's trying to find that ability to store the water as well as convey the water away in a safe manner. So as I say, we are aware of where all the properties are, and it would certainly not be a case. What we don't want to do is to do a solution that is only part successful and doesn't offer that security to the people in the wider community.
Thank you, Nick.
Can you see me up here?
I can. Natalie, are you able to take the microphone up for me, please?
Thank you. My name's Richard Bly. I'm a director of Leatherhead Football Club, and many of you will know that on Christmas Day 2013, the reports of the massive damage to the club was on the BBC News all day that day. So clearly we're as affected, but for slightly different reasons, from the very serious trouble to houses. What we have heard is that sluice gates were raised lower down the river to protect properties in the Molesey area, a far greater number of properties. We have also heard that there was a solution proposed to have a floodplain created to the left of the River Mole as you proceed into Cobham. Could you tell me whether that is correct and whether anything is going to happen to alleviate flood damage in that way?
Thank you for that question. Again, I think that's probably best addressed by either Andy or Nick.
Thank you very much for your question. I think I'll start with the comment about the sluice gates that are down towards Molesey. There is indeed a very large flood alleviation scheme down at that part of the river that was activated during 13-14 and in fact is used quite frequently. I can assure you it has absolutely no impact up here at Leatherhead. It's far too far away to have any kind of backwater to impact at all. In fact, the removal of water out into the Thames would only serve as a benefit, if anything at all. So I can assure you there's no detriment from that scheme. Similar to the lady's question before, that's one of the kind of fine principles we put in place, that there's never any detriment elsewhere. The second question around Cobham, I'm not aware of any other schemes that we're planning in that area. But in terms of protection to Leatherhead Football Club, we have looked at whether we can protect the entire town, and it's not looking feasible. It's very, very difficult to store that volume of water and protect the entire town from flooding. So what we are focusing on is residents first, residential properties, and then looking to provide localised resilience measures to the bits that we can't do. So it is a difficult message that we can't protect the entire town from flooding. But we'll do all we can, and we'd be very keen to work with you to work out what we can do for the football club. So happy to talk to you after this as well.
Thank you, Andy. So I can see there's a hand up in the row behind.
Good evening. Could you explain how much of the problem is due to water sourced from Mole Valley, and how much is sourced from Sussex and Gatwick Airport that comes down the Mole? Because there never seems to be any discussion of water management in West Sussex that reduces the flows into Mole Valley.
Again, we have had the two modelling commissions that have looked at the Upper Mole, which includes all the tributaries that drain through from Sussex in through to Crawley. And part of the scheme there is an Upper Mole flood alleviation scheme that has taken 3 storage reservoirs above Crawley. The principle behind those is to protect Crawley, but it does reduce the peak runoff entering Crawley, which will have a benefit of sort of delaying the hydrograph, so the peak runoff into the Mole and into the Gatwick stream, which are the 2 watercourses that feed through Crawley down into the Mole, will be reduced in terms of that rate of runoff. So we are looking holistically across the catchment, but our initial study concluded that there wasn't a single solution within the middle mole that could be affording the protection to the wider Leatherhead and Fetcham community. In terms, basically, the economics of putting a fundamentally large storage reservoir in the middle mole wasn't feasible.
Are there any other questions in relation to flooding? Yes.
Hello. Yeah, thank you. I'm actually the councillor of Fetcham West. Now, in 2013, when the flood had actually happened, and most of the houses on Cannon Groves were completely flooded, and unfortunately there wasn't anyone to attend those calls, and I was the only councillor who actually, I think, were left to come and pick up the pieces. So I am very concerned when I heard there is no immediate flood defense system can be erected. Because if I remember at those times, it was really a horrible time that people were suffering from. Now, we are prone to be flooded. I think what I have heard so far, I'm not really happy that we can go, in really in peaceful manner, because it could well happen again. And Fetcham is prone to be flooded, and especially those drainage water coming on top of it. When there is a little bit of rain comes, almost half the Fetcham get flooded with these rainwaters. Now, on top of that, these river moles. So until or unless we can install some kind of defense system in place, I'm afraid we are really feeling bad about it, and I hope this Leatherhead, Transform Leatherhead, will do something with in connection with this flooding system. Thank you.
So all I would say is that we're working closely with Surrey County Council, who are the lead flood authority. We're working with the Environment Agency, who bring the expertise around the modelling, and clearly the water companies, so Thames Water and South East Sutton are a key partner in coming up with a solution that works for the benefit of the most residents that we possibly can. But it's not an easy solution. If there is a flood event, I understand that it is possible for people to check the levels of the water levels to get advance warning of if there's a heightened risk of flooding. And clearly we have the emergency plans in place to assist residents if there is a high risk of flooding. But I understand that it is a concerning matter for you. Okay, do we have any more questions in relation to flooding? Because if not, I'd like to open the floor and start with the gentleman up there in the middle. So thank you for waiting.
Thank you. I'm a resident.
Okay. Just to ask a question, whether the budget for the whole project is ring-fenced, how much money is coming from the government, and if there is a change of government in the interim of the project, how will that affect the project?
So the executive, now known as the Cabinet, approved a sum of approximately 1 million of funding to help us initiate a number of the projects that you've seen on the screen tonight. We've had additional funding granted to us by the Coast Capital Local Enterprise Partnership. Some of that money was used to fund the purchase of Clare House and James House. Some of it was used to fund, in part, the improvements to Church Street. But every project is funded on a case-by-case basis. We will explore all sources of funding, but clearly we need to have the funding in place in order to progress certain aspects of the scheme. Now, if we can't source it from public sector effectively, we'll need to look at partnering with the private sector to bring those schemes forward. So
there's no money coming from the government?
Well, the government effectively funds the Coast Capital Local Enterprise and their various grant funding schemes. But we haven't applied to date directly to central government for grant funding. But if a grant does become available from central government, then we will, if there's a project that's eligible for grant funding from that source, then we will go for it. Does that answer your question?
Well, just the other thing is that, so the impact on those grants, if the Environment Agency don't get the grant to carry on their risk management, which I find bizarre, because why are the Environment Agency are included in this at the moment? That they should be separate, doing their own flood risk management of the Mole Valley, because we've lived in Leatherhead for 10 years, and Red House Park floods every autumn, winter, because of the storm drains bursting, and that's never been addressed. Why are you including this in this project to try and shed light on, well, we can sort the flooding as well? That should be done separately. It's not part of the Transforming Leatherhead. That's a day-to-day taxpayer's right to have not sewage flowing through their house or in a car park.
So if I just clarify any misunderstanding, so the funding for the flood alleviation is not coming from the Transform Leatherhead team. It's centrally funded by DEFRA, and if there's a shortfall in funding, they'll look to other partners to help plug that shortfall. But we bring it as part of the Transform Leatherhead initiative because there's an opportunity by working together to come up with a better solution, because clearly MVDC has some land holdings in the town which may assist the EA in coming up with a workable scheme. In the same way as they're working with Surrey County Council and the water companies, they have land holdings in the town. Again, if we work collectively, we have a better chance of coming up with a solution that might mitigate some of the impact of flooding that you've just described. But I can just clarify, so the funding that the EA are using is not anything to do with the council or Transform Leatherhead, it comes direct from DEFRA. Okay. There's a lady with a green jacket on just down there, it's sort of halfway on the right-hand side. Thanks, Gail. Okay.
Hello, I've lived in Randalls Road all my life, and I'm very familiar with the River Mole and over the years, and I've noticed that it's becoming more and more choked by rushes and reeds, and I wondered whether any thought has been given to dredging out the riverbed, because if there's more depth to it, then it would be less likely to flood.
It's a good question. I don't know the answer to that. They've just gone. I'm really sorry. We'll take a note of your question and I'll try and find out the answer. There's a gentleman with a blue jumper on. I'm really sorry if I'm slow getting around to you all.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and good evening, everybody. I'm Luke. I'm from the Grange on Rectory Lane, and I wanted to ask a question about transport, because I'm visually impaired, and a lot of my colleagues at the Grange, where I'm about to live, are also have a disability, and wanted to ask a question about the bus service, because why is the 479 bus route non-existent? And there's no, you have to wait until several years until the bus turns up. Why is that, please? Thank you.
I'm sorry, I don't know the answer to that specific question. It's something I'll need to take up with colleagues at County who look after the passenger bus service. But again, we'll take a note and we'll come back to you.
And the bus drivers, the bus drivers, some of the bus drivers are really quite rude.
Okay. So I'm sure the bus companies would want to hear from you if you as a customer have suffered from inappropriate behaviour from a driver. But again, all we can do is pass your feedback on to Surrey County Council, who can then pick it up with the relevant bus companies.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Peter?
Hello.
Hello, Peter.
Working? Yeah.
Evening.
Thank you. Can I take you back to the early part of the evening, Simon? And you showed us a Venn diagram, and you thought that the economic sector of that was the one that was most likely to be fudged or missed or in some way having to be reinterpreted. It's the whole financial basis of Transform that worries me. The study started in 2014. You're looking some 10 years ahead, probably before it's finished, whatever your putative plans are. At the moment, the economic situation in this country, with Marks and Spencer's closing 100 stores, so many big retailers shutting, demanding reduced rents from landlords, and then other retailers saying, oi, that's not fair. If failing companies are getting reduced rents, that's unfair competition. I just wonder whether the whole premise is sustainable. I wonder what sort of futurologists you've got working on this, how you're looking at what the landscape of England is going to be like in 10 years' time. How many self-driving cars will there be? Will people not own so many cars? Will there be more and more online shopping? It just seems to me that Transform Leatherhead's either started too late or perhaps too early. I'm sorry. I've tried to combine 2 or 3 questions in one there. I think I got away with it.
Yes, I noticed that, Peter. Very skillfully done. Thank you. I'll start off with perhaps some of the first part of your comments, and then I'll hand over to Emma to direct the remainder of your questions. I certainly wasn't trying to give any impression at all that the finances are being fudged. As Emma has already explained, and as the funds flow forecast, which is another one of the documents that we've put onto the website, shows, each of the schemes is funded on an ongoing basis with various partners. And we certainly don't fudge anything. What I was trying to get across with that comment is that we have been accused in the past of saying Transform Leatherhead is all about the council making money. You're only doing these schemes so that you can build and get money that will come into the council's coffers. And so that's the misimpression that I'm trying to address with those sorts of comments when I say that personally I would argue for the council not necessarily maximising the absolute last drop of cash out of every scheme that we're doing, if by doing so we can have more public benefit or more wider benefit for the community. So it's all about balancing these things up. We could, if using Clare and James House as an example, just have done what every other landlord would have done, which is turn it into flats as it is and just have done with it, pocket the cash and scalper. But that's not the business we're in. We want to invest in Leatherhead, and so as we develop the schemes, if we do see an area where we can spend a little bit more to get a much better result, I'll be arguing for that. In terms of all the rest of it, I'm going to hand over to Emma.
Thank you, Simon. I think what's undoubtedly true is that the pace of change in the retail sector has accelerated significantly in the last 3 years. And as you said, every day you read another disaster in the press around a particular retailer who's on the verge of insolvency, has gone into a CVA, is laying off huge numbers of staff. We absolutely acknowledge that. That's one reason why I've engaged Cushman & Wakefield, who are very much thought leaders in the field. They're not just about retail. They're about other uses for the town centre, in particular leisure and what's in the jargon is called experiential. So they look at things like, how can we create a space that is usable, not just for shopping, but for other uses? How can we create a space that will draw people into the town, and by drawing people into the town, generate the footfall to support those businesses which can function in an economy which is more and more dominated by online shopping. So that's why we've appointed them, because they have that expertise. We as council officers, we don't know that business. That's why we use them. You could say, why do anything? Why not just wait and see what happens? But the council made a decision that wasn't the right thing to do for Leatherhead. They made a decision to invest in these studies, in this programme, to try and create Leatherhead that was fit for purpose for the next 25 years, and that's what we're trying to do. We may not get it right, but we're doing our very best to make sure that we use the best advice out there to create something that is fit for purpose for you and your children and your grandchildren for the next 25 years, and that's what we're trying to do.
Just hope it doesn't become too Swan-centric.
Agreed. So we recognise that we own the Swan Centre. By purchasing the 2 units in the high street, number 21, 23, that gives us a bigger stake on the high street. It creates more options for the Swan Centre, but it gives us a stake in the high street. So at the last forum, one of the critiques was, why aren't you doing more about the high street? And our answer was, we don't own much property in the high street. This purchase gives us more of a stake in the high street, and we hope that by creating some short-term temporary uses for those units, pending the outcome of the longer-term plans, will give you something a bit different that you wouldn't otherwise see in the high street. And by doing something a bit different, hopefully we'll encourage others to do something a bit different to give you a high street that perhaps is more sustainable than it has been in the past. Okay, we have a lady, sorry.
Question from Miss Jane Clarkson.
Yeah.
And her sixth form students from St John's.
Hi there.
Hello. We just wanted to ask, one of the things that you mentioned was about the different places having a distinct sense of place, and what it was about Leatherhead that you were trying to convey, or what is it that is the sense of place about Leatherhead? What are we trying to show to outsiders? What are we trying to provide for the people who live here? Because you talk about live, work and visit, but you know, that doesn't give a strong sense of place or identity. So what is it that you envision for Leatherhead?
So the positioning statement that was put up at the start of this evening's presentation talks about Leatherhead as a market town. And that's what we want to celebrate and recognise through anything that we do through Transform Leatherhead. It's not about making Leatherhead a replica of any other town in Surrey or elsewhere in the country. Leatherhead has its own identity. We want to celebrate that, but at the same time, give it a function that works for people who work in the district, who live in the district, and who visit the district. That's what the master plan's about. A few more questions. There's a lady with a yellow jumper just sitting in the 4th row.
Excuse me.
Thank you, Gail.
Thank you.
Hello.
Am I talking in the right place? Can you hear me?
Yes, we can,
good.
yeah.
It refers very closely to Peter's question, but more precisely, you own some property now in the Swan Centre, and we are hearing dreadful stories and seeing awful scenes, really, of other high streets up and down the country where the main store has closed for various reasons and the others sort of are following suit, sadly. Have you thought of, say, dividing up the space that you now have in the Swan Centre and trying to let it to smaller, interesting, niche shops, like villages have? I mean, I look at Bookham, and most of their shops are sort of flourishing, you know, and Reigate is flourishing too. And I thought, if we forgot the big picture with the plate glass windows, like you said, and instead opted for the small and interesting, perhaps we would have more of a future like that. Well, just a suggestion.
Well,
thank you.
So it's perfect. John Percy's in the audience. He's heard your idea. I think, interestingly, when Cushman Wakefield did their presentation for the viability contract, their architect very much talked about creating a flexible space in the Swan Centre, which could be adapted for exactly that kind of reason, so you could accommodate the smaller independent retailers, not just the big national retailers. Yeah, okay.
Thank you. Now, talking about roads, some of the roads around here are in an appalling state. Now, I live off Copthorne Road. Now, I don't know why they built a sandpit gravel place in a residential area. It must have been in the 1930s when that road was built. Also, down by the station, there is always a flood at the bottom of Station Road. I don't know if the land there belongs to the railway company or the road, but some of the roads around here are in a pretty poor state. And that's not the main road, it's the minor roads.
Okay. So, as you probably know, Surrey County Council are responsible for maintaining roads, and I think we have our local county councillor in the audience tonight. Tim Hall, I think, was here earlier. I don't know if he's available to answer your question. Tim.
3 or 4 questions I think we've got in a set there, haven't we? Paul, I have told you before that the gravel point and the building supplies of Copthorne Road was actually there as the builders to actually build Copthorne Road. But the County Council has announced on Tuesday another 12 million in all for major repairs of our local road system. In Leatherhead, I have put forward on the list Bypass Road, the Crescent, the station, the Randalls Road by the station, and also the Guildford Road at Fetcham as some of our top priority areas from the winter damage. We have twice the number of potholes we had last year, if not 3 times, and we are investing 12 million this year and another 8 million next year. And turning to the flooding by the station, we have cleared through the county gully drains. They are relatively clear, with the exception of the one which we discovered as a missing asset on the Leatherhead Residents clean-up day, which we're still having cleaned out. It appears there is a problem with the Thames Water sewer going underneath Red House grounds, which is why we have the problem again back in the car park. And we are pursuing Thames Water at the moment to try and get a joint site visit again to have another go at that. But please, can I say to everybody, please do report drainage issues. Just send me an email. The flood group, you know, with all due respect to Raj, you do actually remember that I was standing beside you in the middle of Cannon Grove. And I have been to a series of flood action group meetings with a number of people in this room, and there are lots of people working very hard. But please, if you have a flooding issue or a drainage issue, report it. Stick it on the County Council website. Send it to me. My email is on the county thing. Ring me up. My phone number is available all over the town. You might even bump into me wandering around the town quite often. Please do. Yeah. Because I didn't know that Sue, who I know quite well, had flooding where she was. I knew the garden cottages below her was, and I bet she's not on Andy and Phil and Nick's list. So please report it. Tell people we have 12 million going into more highway repairs plus some other works. Do report it is our first thing.
Thank you. That's a much more comprehensive answer than I could possibly have given. Okay.
We need to answer Caroline's question. Before we move on, we need to answer Caroline's question with Cushman's.
John, are you happy to talk about the vision for the Swan Centre?
Some pretty wonderful questions actually that have come out this evening, and I think that sort of unique identity about what makes Leatherhead is going to be absolutely critical to what makes the town centre successful. And I think a continuation of the centre in its current form, as it really is, and with some of the brands which are already in there, is probably to sort of mean that its success is not going to be as great as it could be, and it's certainly not fulfilling its potential within the town and its local area. There is a lot of doom and gloom, and there's another question came in terms of, is it the right time to be doing anything? Is it the right time to invest? And actually, it's probably the perfect time to invest, because if you don't, then it's only going to go downhill. And secondly, with any period of change comes great opportunity. So now is that kind of window of opportunity to really start for that change to manifest itself and to put other things in there. I think a combination of local brands and things which are much more relevant to the local community and the local shopper are going to be really, really critical to the success of this. So I think all those things we expect to be in the mix for the development and the propositions that we put forward.
Thank you, John. Gail?
Oh, it's turned on, is it? Yeah. My name's Tony Russell. I'm representing the Residents Association. If you've got this wonderful concept about transforming Leatherhead, what do you think about transforming crime? We've had 3 knife incidents in this town since November. One involving a woman that took money from a bank and the guy pulled out a knife, needed a taser officer. 2 youngsters, school age, 11 and 15, on a Saturday afternoon. Now, factually, you now own the Swan Centre. why don't you think about talking to the police about providing the base, either free or peppercorn rent, and actually considering to fund a PCSO? Because our PCSOs are no longer here. They've been moved out. When the police station was closed in Kingston Road, they went to Randall's Way. But when that was sold to Titan Developments, they went to Dorking. Dorking's fine. There was an article in the paper that residents of the Goodwins estate, that's in Dorking, are worried about the level of crime after the police had a major sweep of drugs and knives. Now in Dorking, they found 100 grams of cannabis. In St John's Road, in the February incident, the police found 146 packages of cocaine and 69 packages of heroin. So I think the problem's here. The police are not here. So technically, why don't Mole Valley consider a completely different approach, provide a premise for the police, consider funding for a PCSO, because I assure you, the Chamber of Commerce and so many businesses say they're not happy. Lots of incidents. There was one business in the town where 2 young people were taking drugs outside the shop window, right in the high street. They phoned 101, nobody turned up. Big problem. So why don't you reflect on that and think about a different approach in the town centre? You own it.
What I can say is that in relation to the proposed changes to the Swan Centre, so the short-term works, we've had a report done by the neighbourhood policing team to help inform some of the changes to the car park and also to the refurbished public facilities to help reduce the risk of things like drug taking. There are certain things you can do with lighting what makes it harder for drug addicts to use them for that purpose. In terms of the police, they're not here tonight, so they can't comment. I do understand they're looking to relocate their headquarters from Guildford, potentially to the Leatherhead area, and I can feed back the comment around the PCSO. I can see you're not happy with that answer. All I can do is pick up with neighbourhood policing colleagues and see if I can get you any better information. There's a lady in purple at the back.
Over the years I've lived here, we've had lots of improvement plans for our town, some of which have been absolutely disastrous, and we were voted the worst high street in England. So what I'd say is that putting that aside, and other people have brought this up, we do need the maintenance now. We don't want airy-fairy in things for the future. We need our town kept looking all right now. We need the cycle paths, which aren't upkept at all. I'm a cyclist, and some of them, the few we've got, some of them are disastrous. I mean, you can't use them. And we also need things like opposite Peter's shop. We've got the nice wrought iron things that people can go up and down in wheelchairs and things. But the tiles have been off now for about 3 years, I would say. They look absolutely atrocious. The wrought iron can't look nice with all broken tiles, and that is in the centre of the town. These are small things. It's like the dead plants. They're small things, but these are the things we've got to live here now, and we want it looking nice now, and I have to use the cycle paths now. So we do want maintenance.
So in relation to the cycle path maintenance, again, that's a matter for County Council. And we at Embassy have been trying really hard to work with the highways team to see what we can do in the short term to try and deal with the problem of the tiles coming off the so-called waterless water feature. Those particular tiles, I don't know if you know, they come from a quarry in Wales. They're cut individually for repairs. So we've been looking at a short-term tactical, possibly a rendering solution that would at least make it tidy, if not particularly aesthetically pleasing. Again, yeah. What we don't want to do, though, is spend money on an asset which, subject to the outcome of the transport modelling work, may not have a long-term future in that part of the high street. So depending on what the modelling says, it may be that that part of the high street is changed quite fundamentally. We wouldn't want to lose that beautiful wrought iron artwork that's been designed. We would want to put that somewhere else and retain that within the town centre. But that's why we don't want to do we don't want to spend too much money on something which may not be there in the longer term. well, that's why we thought perhaps a short-term render solution might at least make it tidy. But again, we'll see what we can find out from colleagues at County and keep people updated. There's a lady over there, and yeah.
Just talking about what was mentioned earlier about James House and Clare House and the development there. And I know that the images, as you said, might be just for illustration, but I noticed that the development looked like it was about 6 or 7 stories, which is much higher than Clare House is currently, 4 stories. And then there's the Running Horse pub, which is just round the corner. Now, I know your answer might be that, okay, there's the design feature and then getting planning application. But it does seem to me that might be a bit ambitious to put 7 stories there. I know it will make more money. I know you weren't saying that money was one of the features, but obviously the higher the building, the more flats, the more that you can sell. But it just strikes me that that's very ambitious considering the Running Horse pub and the local environs, and it won't fit in with the look round the river either.
Yes, I mean, as I said earlier, it is, and you acknowledge it is an artist's impression. We want a new and exciting building there, something that's going to be a feature, but we don't want to build something that's too tall. Equally, as you have also acknowledged, we've got to make the thing work financially. What that's all going to look like is going to be determined by the planning process, and what our architects and our design team can come up with that will maximise the benefit as well as make the return financially sensible. And it's one of the reasons why it's going to take us a year to get to the sort of point where we have an outline planning permission. It's a long, and as I've said before, it's a long and complex process. What we don't want to do, obviously, is blight any of the areas with new building. Now, each and every person here and everybody listening will have their own definition as to what that might look like. But that's why we're consulting, that's why we've engaged experts, that's why, sort of picking up on what Peter was saying earlier, the balance has to be right. And so we can't predict how tall the building is going to be proposed to be. We can't predict how high the planners will let us go or how low the planners will let us go. So it is speculation at the moment, but we want to produce something that's going to be an asset to Leatherhead, and we'll see what the process determines.
Okay, so yeah, we're taking a question at the back. Gentleman in the jumper.
Is this on? It seems like once the Mole Valley has got an interest in either a building or some of the shops, then that location gets quite a considerable amount of interest from this transform Leatherhead. You've got the Clare and James house, which was fairly... No, let me start again. If you transform Clare and James House into a large shopping centre, come restaurants and so on, you're dragging the centre of Leatherhead away from the high street. You've just bought something in the high street, you say, those 2 shops. You've now got a bit of skin in the game, as they say. I used to have a place on the high street. When there was parking there, later on in the afternoon, there was considerable amount more footfall and hence commercial traffic than when you have no parking at all. Are you considering doing any kind of parking in the high street for half an hour or 40 minutes or an hour or so people can come in and do their quick shopping and keep these various retailers in business?
So just to clarify, Clare House and James House is not a retail-led development. It's a cafe on the ground floor with residential. So we're not looking to put shopping units down by the river. So we're focusing the retail elements on and around the Swan Centre and the High Street.
Nevertheless, it is still owned by the council, and you're putting a great deal of investment and interest into it.
We are. I just wanted to clarify, we're not putting retail down by the riverside. In terms of your point around parking and whether or not that would unlock additional footfall to support the high street, the jury is out on that. As many people who say to us, you should open up the high street to traffic and reduce the pedestrian times. We have other people who say to us, actually, you need to fully pedestrianise the high street. That would better support footfall into the town centre. So what we are doing is we have commissioned the transport study. We won't have the results back until early autumn, and there will be undoubtedly further pieces of work to undertake off the back of that. But we need the evidence base, because what we don't want to do is go down the avenue of, say, changing the use of the high street one way or the other, because that could then create unforeseen consequences in other parts of the traffic network. And for every person who says, actually, parking in high street is a secret to generating footfall for businesses, someone will say, no, that's not the answer. So what we want to do is get the data, model the outcomes, and if there is a possibility that changing the zoning of the high street would better support the businesses, one option is to do that as a pilot. But again, it would go through a statutory consultation process. The police would be a statutory consultee. They would need to look at it from a public safety perspective as well as from a highways perspective, and everybody would have an opportunity to comment, businesses, residents, and other people with a vested interest. So we haven't ruled it out, but we need to wait to get the data back.
Could I just add, the way you phrased that particular question made it sound to me like you had the understanding that the council owns assets and therefore we're investing in them. It's actually the other way around. We're buying assets in order to invest in the town. So yes, Claire and James House is owned by the council and it is getting a lot of attention. We bought it so that we could help transform Leatherhead, not because we wanted to own two 1970s blocks of office accommodation in the town. Similarly with the high street shops, we have bought those as strategic purchases to enable us to better explore and have wider options in terms of helping the high street thrive. So we are investing in our assets, but we had to buy them first, and we only bought them because they help transform.
Yeah.
Yes, good evening. When we met a week ago, and two people raised the question that the gentleman's just asked, which is, why don't you extend the parking hours in the high street, as it might improve shopper footfall to the benefit of the traders? You gave fairly much the answer that you've just given, and when we pursued the point, you said you would consider whether, as a trial period, in the period between now and when this transport study is produced, you would consider, as a temporary measure, a trial period of extending the parking hours from 4:30 back down to 3:30 to see whether actually in reality it had any impact, and that you would go away and think about that. Have you gone away, and is that your answer, that you find it technically impossible to do that?
So what I said was that I would check with County, the Highways Authority, to see what the process would be, because my understanding was that it would be a particular regulatory process that would have to be followed. That's what I did, and the process is that it has to be taken to the local committee. It needs to be advertised for 21 days. Depending on the objections and representations that are made, the committee will then determine those, and you can have a temporary variation to a traffic order. That's what regulates the use of the high street, and depending on the feedback at the end of that trial period, the variation is either confirmed or it's taken back as to how it used to be. But I say it's not something that I can decide, and what I committed to do and what I have done is to check with counties what process would apply. I've done that, and that's what I've just explained, hopefully, to you just now.
But does that mean that it's impossible for you to have a trial period between now and the publication of the transport study?
It's a county matter. Even if we initiated the process, there's no guarantee that following the statutory consultation that the committee would agree to make that variation. So it's not in my gift. my recommendation was that we awaited the outcome of the transport modelling work, get the data, and then take it from there as to whether or not we look at changing the ways in which particular streets are used from a traffic and pedestrian perspective.
Okay. I hear the answer.
Thank you. Okay. So I'm advised that we've got time for 3 more questions. I'm sorry if we can't get round everybody this evening, but as I said, we will pick them up afterwards. There's a lady at the front there with a pale pink sweater.
There are lots of questions, but one that comes out now, why can't we open up the High Street into Bridge Street like it used to be? It's closing off Bridge Street. The shops down there aren't doing anything. The High Street isn't doing anything because we've got this big cement thing across the road. Waitrose lorries are having to back up Church Street right to the traffic lights, causing terrible congestion because they cannot get round up to High Street. Are you ever going to open it up again?
So I think the answer to the previous question was around undertaking transport modelling, understanding the impact of changing the use of the High Street, whether or not it should be opened up to Bridge Street. Once we understand within the model what the impact will be, we could then look at whether to translate that idea into reality through perhaps a piloted change to the traffic order. But what we don't want to do is change something and then create an even worse situation somewhere else within the town. If Waitrose aren't complying with their planning conditions, which regulates how they access the site to make deliveries, that's a matter for planning enforcement, so we would need to pick that up with the enforcement team. Again, there are so many options as to how we deal with traffic in the High Street and what the best option is. But what I would say tonight is that what we've seen from the Muddy Stilettos Award is that actually we have some great shops. We have Barton's Bookshop on Bridge Street, which has done fantastically well, and Eden Florist, just one of them. There are some great business in the High Street, notwithstanding the issues that you raised around lack of parking, whether it should be pedestrian, part full, not at all. So I want people to go away with the right impression. It's not all a disaster in the High Street. We have some great businesses there who don't do very well.
Can I just say, if they can't deliver the goods properly, the shops will close. There's a very good furniture shop there as well. What we seem to forget, they have very big lorries.
Yeah.
They're also having trouble. And they'll give up because, they won't get the trade, they can't get things delivered. So I really think it should be looked into more closely.
Okay, thank you. So we've got 2 more questions. Okay.
The model where you were drawing the boundary for your transport study, I was pleased to see that you had increased it to include one of the junctions for the M25, but it doesn't include the other junction, and given the amount of traffic that comes off the M25 in a tidal flow and then goes back on, it does seem a bit of a flaw. And also, in the transport study, are you considering the fact that Randalls Road is going to be closed for quite a considerable period, which will mean that the transport will be, all that traffic will be going around in different directions? I think it's through June, there's about 5 weeks of closure.
Yeah. So the model work...
I beg your pardon.
Okay, so in relation to the model we've commissioned is what's called a micro-simulation model, and it works in partnership with the more strategic model that County own, which models the wider area. We haven't included Junction 9 because Highways England, who are responsible for the motorway network, are undertaking their own studies and feasibility work in relation to how they can mitigate and reduce the impact of lorries in particular coming off the M25 up that Junction 9 slip road and hitting the roundabout at the top. It's an issue from a highway safety perspective because it results in congestion back up along the road off the M25 up towards Junction 9. So that's why we haven't included it in our study. But through our close working relationship with County, and I'm happy to say we've appointed a strategic transport manager. She happens to be in the audience tonight, but she will be our go-to person to help us work effectively with our colleagues in the highways team, who in turn work alongside Highways England, again to try and look at transport in a holistic way across the Leatherhead area. But for the purposes of our project and our programmes, we're just looking at how we manage the traffic flows within the centre of Leatherhead, and then with a view to not making it worse on the surrounding areas. Okay, so I think last question. Okay.
I'd just like to draw attention to the fact that in a previous report from Transform, they made reference to the fact that the car parking system, as opposed to the car park's capacity, the car park system ought to be made pay on exit. Now, nothing more seems to have happened about that, but I cannot see anything that's stopping that being done and put into operation now, and cheering up a lot of people who get fed up with having to watch their clocks, etc., as opposed to going for a cup of tea or what have you, and enjoying the town centre. Can we have some attention paid to that, please?
So when we did the works in Church Street, we introduced a new kind of machine where you can... Actually, I might hand over to Alison here, who probably knows this better than I do.
So yeah, we've trialled a new machine in Church Street, similar to the ones they have at the Royal Surrey Hospital. And you can make a choice whether you pay and display, or this process called check-in, check-out, where you go up to the machine, you put in your car registration number, you can use a credit card, and it spits a ticket out that you can put on your car, and then at the end of it, you check out. That's been trialled in Church Street, and the feedback we've got is good. Then also as part of the Swan Centre and the car park improvements that we had up with the ramps and etc., the plan is that we get 6 of those same machines to replace the existing machines. And by doing it that way, you don't have to have barriers on exit, which tend to go wrong and tend to mean quite a lot of structural alteration. So the answer is yes.
Right. Is that I understand we've got one more question. Is it Councillor Crome? Yeah.
And we'll make this the last question.
Yeah.
Thank you for squeezing me in. I just think it's really important we go back to Ball Hill, because that hasn't been covered in the questions. And there has been a lot of anxiety, and you might have noticed some groans as you touched on it, Simon, in your slides. And I know that we can't look at the artist's impression and say that's exactly what it's going to look like, but can we agree, there are so many of us here tonight that don't want to lose the green space, the play space, the outdoor space. So as a principle, can we agree that and move forward? It's a nice, straightforward question to finish.
Yeah, yes, thank you, Joe. And a reasonably straightforward one to answer, which apart from we'll see what comes through the design process and we'll see how the whole thing shapes up. There are planning restrictions on what we can and we can't do in terms of taking public green space out of areas, and we will have to work closely within those. So we will be, when I said we'll need a planning permission for this, and it will have to follow all the planning rules and regulations. The protection of green space and public utility space is part of that.
Your scheme implies a major development that appalls many residents of Leatherhead. It's utterly out of keeping with this town.
Well, as I've said before, it's exactly what people wanted to see in the consultation. It was a comprehensive consultation. We have put the artist's impression in there simply to give an impression of what a mixed-use, new, attractive place might look like, that is both a step-change gateway to that part of the town, and to provide a mixed use of leisure and of public green space. That, together with the planning requirements, and together with all the other constraints that I've outlined with the dependency diagrams as to how we can proceed and when we can proceed, means that anybody, as I said before, anybody who tries to predict what exactly it's going to look like is simply speculating. There's no point in me speculating further as to what we will or what we won't do. I will be looking at the schemes as they come forward, as will colleagues, as will the public. And when we get to that point, then we'll all be able to make a collective decision. The council will make a decision based on what's possible, what's practical, and what the people say they want. And I don't really think there's any point in going any further with that one because, as I said, it is just speculation. I'm very sorry to anybody who hasn't yet had a question opportunity. You have cards if you'd like to jot something down or if you'd like to contact us afterwards. We will answer all the questions and we will put them up onto the website so that everybody can see them. My slides from this evening will also be on the website if you want to download or look at them. So thank you to everybody who's remained with us. We've had some leakage of people during the course of the evening, but thank you all for listening. Thank you for staying with us. Can I give one final plug to asking you all to sign up to the Transform Leatherhead e-update? We're going to produce them on roughly a monthly basis, and it will keep you as in touch as you can be with everything that's going on as it happens. Now, instead of me just saying thank you very much and wandering off, we've arranged a little treat for those that have managed to last the course, and also for everybody who's watching, listening on Facebook. And that is now my pleasure to introduce Ryan Berman. He's a young musician, and he was showcased at the Youth Showcase Awards earlier on in this year. And he has created his own, or written his own song called The Riverside, which wasn't, I don't believe, actually dedicated to our riverside, but had a nice little ring to it. And I thought it would be a lively way to send everybody away with a spring in their step rather than just listening to me droning on and then shuffling off. So, which is exactly what I'm going to do now, and hand the stage over to Ryan. Thank you all very much.
Good evening. How you all doing? You good? That was quite tense, wasn't it? Yeah. So my name's Ryan, as it says on the screen. I'm a local boy. I live in Leatherhead. I grew up in this area, and some of you might recognise me. My day job is I work at the cafe in the Nuffield Health Gym. So if you're wandering by, come in and have a cappuccino or a coffee. It's the best in town. No offence to anyone else who makes coffee, but yeah, come and say hello. I'm also a local musician, so I work in this place during the day, and then in the evenings and weekends I'm out and about gallivanting all over the UK. I have a band, we play shows, and I've been lucky to tour throughout the UK and in Ireland as well. And this is a track that I wrote whilst I was travelling through Asia, and it got me thinking about what home is. And it was the longest time I'd ever spent away from home, and it made me think about like what home is. And I've come to the conclusion it's more of a feeling than a place. And I know everyone has their own opinions on how Leatherhead should be developed, but I think we can all agree that we just want what's best for our town, and we want everyone to kind of be able to prosper and thrive in a really nice environment. And yeah, this is a track called Riverside, and I hope you guys like it. Rest here by my side so that you'll never feel it. And all these places people think they'll never go, but I know that you'll be there. And this world is coming down around us, but darling, I can't hold the ceilings now. So let's be trapped beneath the rubble without these consequences, just feelings are pulling us down. And I will remember better days. Anytime I'm gone away, with all your loving childish ways. And down by the riverside, and down by the riverside, and so humble me with honesty when I can't even find the words to say. We turn our eyes to the skies and watch the day bleed into night. Oh, we've been there. When the light comes wandering in, but we can't fight it off. No, we can't block it out. So will I still wrapped in whispers, unscathed, innocent, where others can only shout. And only you took the time to be the bigger one. And only you taught me how to be the better one. And only you taught me how to be the bigger one. And only you. But I will remember better days. Anytime I'm gone away, through your loving childish ways. I will remember the days. Will you go? Will you stay? You light the fire, now I'm the blaze. By the riverside. Thank you very much for listening, guys. Thank you for having me transform Leatherhead.